That's smart.
Every once in a while, I'm smart.
As long as you have at least some sort of average going, where it's like, three smart things to 10 not smart things. It's still, it's in there. It's in the mix.
My old music business professor would always say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, and that's
Yes.
kind of stuck with. So, welcome back to whatever the heck we're calling this series. I haven't actually decided yet, which I probably should, because it's my fourth guest now, I think. So today we are talking with John Mark Nelson, an LA-based songwriter, musician, producer, engineer. I don't want to say jack of all trades because I don't think that's always considered a compliment, although I think it is. But you certainly have a wingspan when it comes to the jobs in music that you encompass. And what did I miss besides all those things? Are you a
Um,
luthier? Do you build mics? Am I worried about competition?
I've got a couple prototypes I'm working on.
Oh,
No,
another one.
no, that was a very generous introduction. And I don't think anything was missed. I think that pretty much sums up. If it's something involved in the creation of recordings, I'm there. Um, Gear stuff, not so much. If I can understand it and implement it, I feel lucky, but man, the creation of musical equipment is far beyond my grasp.
A lot of people say that, and you know what I say to them every time? Well, the creation of music is far beyond my grasp, which is why I kind of went into the gear part.
We
So
all need each other.
exactly, right? It's a leaning tower, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, so I am kind of curious because I've read a little bit about your history.
Mm.
As a songwriter, you were, if I remember right, like it was Pitchfork or something like that. They called you one of the big up and coming next things a
Mhm.
while back. But I'm curious about your history. Tell me a little bit about what attracted you to this insane occupation where we work three times as hard for half the money. And what keeps you in it, and just get let's hear a little bit about your journey into this madness.
Yeah. Okay. Well, buckle up. And stop me if this becomes too long-winded, but I do think it is a bit of a journey, and maybe would provide some encouragement for anyone on their own path, that if it looks kind of long and winding and crazy and non-linear, you're probably not alone at all. And my sort of zoomed out like phrase that I feel like describes my whole life in music is just following the next open door. Because I feel like there can be a lot of things where you're hell bent on a direction, head down, grinding away, and just like doors are not opening. And then the most mysterious thing is like, oh, well, over here, I have this opportunity to go do this. Maybe I'll just try that. And so I'll tell the story in a linear fashion, but that is definitely the theme of like hustling, 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 and then being like, oh, wait, this seems kind of like it's not working. But what about this slight variation of what I had in mind? So, growing up, I grew up in this kind of far-reaching suburbs outside of Minneapolis in Minnesota.
You
There
and
was kind
Corey
of
Wong.
like, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I grew up in on the border of two small towns called Excelsior and Chanhassen. Chanhassen of Prince fame, which is where he set up Paisley Park. But it's kind of a funny area because it's like Minneapolis and then like suburb, another suburb, less populated suburb, less populated suburb, and then if you go any further west from where I grew up, it's like people were growing corn. So it was like a very spacious, open, woody lake kind of childhood. And my parents are both musical. And so music was very much around the house. My dad's a piano player and my mom sings. And like a core memory I have is that when they would put me and my siblings to bed, some nights they would go sit at the piano after they put us in bed. And my dad would take out the Carole King Tapestry songbook, and they would just play the album down. So my dad would just like they just track one. My dad would play piano. My mom would sing just track two, and I feel like that was a very very core memory of music being very much around the house. And so obviously when your dad is an instrumentalist, you can't possibly sit down for lessons with him, but you can sort of peek around the corner and try to figure out what's going on. So I would hear him play something, and then when he was gone, I'd like sit down at the piano and try to figure it out by ear. But if he ever wanted to, tell me about music theory or get me to like open up a lesson book, it's like, Dad, I don't want to do that. But music was very much like it was in the house, and it felt like a very intriguing sort of mysterious magic. And as I got into my early teen years, I um, started to think, well, my dad plays piano, so I got to do something that's a little more rock and roll. So I started playing the drum set. That was like my first love in music. And I was listening to terrible, like Red Hot Chili Peppers on like a portable CD player with like headphones on. I would just blast like, something from like, I don't know. I don't even know. I can't even think of a song at the moment. Like whatever was out at the time, like maybe that Stadium Arcadium record.
Hmm.
I'd just like blast Red Hot Chili Peppers and play like terrible loud drums that my parents graciously tolerated.
I was gonna say, any parents of aspiring drummers,
Oh my gosh.
deepest sympathy, and I mean, the patience that must develop in somebody is.
Yeah, it's like drum set and like violin maybe are the are the most like require the most patient journey of parents. So to anyone out there struggling, you're not alone. So I started playing drums and was really, really passionate about that, and started to become, like a full-on band nerd. Went to I was homeschooled for a part of my journey, and then asked my parents if I could go to public high school so I could get involved in like marching band and jazz band and all that stuff. So drums, drums, drums was the center of my world. Um, and then a pivotal moment happened for me when, at some point in my kind of maybe like 13, 14, when it was obvious that I was like very interested in music. My dad told me that he had purchased some home recording equipment to get in on the big home recording boom, the impending home recording boom. So he told me that he had got one of the first iMacs that had like GarageBand, and he had bought the Yeti Snowball USB microphone for that high fidelity right at home sound. And so he
Only if
like
you record in a square, untreated drywall bedroom,
yes, yep,
as I am
yeah,
currently doing.
yes, exactly. So I remember distinctly like the first time I like set that up, because he had bought it thinking like I'm gonna get into home recording, but then he never really got around to it. So he was like, if you want to set it up and learn how. So I distinctly remember, because I knew how to play a little piano, and I knew how to play drums, and I even knew how to play a little bit of guitar because my older brother played some guitar. I remember the first day like setting up that computer and like doing some terrible drum, groove through the USB microphone, and then like picking up the guitar and doing something even worse over the top of that, and then going to the piano and doing something even worse over the top of that. And I think that day like sealed the doom of like my career as an instrumentalist, because at that point, like sitting and practicing one instrument, I was like, that is so boring. Like I want to hear them all interact.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly, do rudiments and scales and anything disciplined at that point.
Wood shedding is, I don't know how people do it. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously everybody has different passions, but I had the same
Yeah.
experience in music college. I was like, I don't want to spend like 6 to 8 hours a day
Yeah.
doing exactly what you described.
So as soon as I figured out how to make really, really bad recordings in GarageBand, I was like, uh-oh, this might be the thing that I love way more than instruments. And so again, that's kind of like the first instance of that sort of following the open door in my life, where it was like I probably, if I had the discipline and patience, I maybe could have stayed on a path of being more of an instrumentalist and being a bit more like my dad, where his musical life was all based around a single instrument. He's a very gifted piano player. But man, as soon as that open door of, oh, I have a microphone and GarageBand laying around and I could like layer things on top of each other, I was like, oh no, it's over. So I'll flash forward a bit so the story doesn't become too laborious to get to present day. But basically, I started falling in love with making really bad recordings. And after I made, 2 hard drives full of horrible jams that were just like nebulous nothings, I realized, like, I guess if I'm really gonna have fun recording, I should probably start making songs and not just, Red Hot Chili Pepper rip-off jams. And my dad can sing and my mom can sing, and so I never really, like, thought about singing or being a singer, but it sort of became this sort of experiment to think, well, I've got the microphone, I've got GarageBand, it's ready to go. So I should probably start making like my own songs. And
Mhm.
so I just started kind of writing really bad 14-year-old songs and trying to sort of like produce them. And that kind of started my life, the first chapter of my musical life as sort of like artist, where I was writing songs. I would, start to go play at open mic nights in like Minneapolis, and started making these really bad recordings and songs. And due to it being the dawn of the internet and no one telling me otherwise, I started putting them online
Was this
publicly.
in the MySpace days, or was
This
it?
was in the MySpace days and also like the very dawn of Bandcamp, when
Okay,
Bandcamp first
gotcha.
launched. And so I was like, I gotta have a Bandcamp page. I gotta have these songs available to the absolutely no one that wants them or asked for them. Um, and so I started making songs, making songs, making songs, making songs. And a pivotal moment for me, when I was a few years later, a senior in high school. I remember I had just gotten my first phone that had email on it.
Ooh. You and I
It,
are around the same-ish age, right? Because
yeah,
I'm 35 or 36 now, I guess. Yeah,
yep, and I turned 30 this past fall.
okay.
So we're close.
Well, in
We're
6
right in.
years, you're gonna get a frosted chin like this.
I can't wait. I can't wait, honestly. I think it's going to bring a lot of prestige to what I do. People will finally take me seriously. Um, so I remember one day I got a very gracious email on my phone heading to school, um, because Minneapolis has a great AAA radio station called The Current that at the time dedicated an hour every. It's a NPR affiliate station, and they dedicate an hour every week to just local music.
Oh,
They play an
wow.
hour of local music, which is
That's awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
And I got this very, very gracious email from someone at the radio station saying, "Hey, I was digging around underneath the like Minneapolis tag on Bandcamp, and I found your music." And they very graciously were like, "It's not really anything that I could play on the radio." But they were like, "Just keep at it, and if you ever make anything in the future, like send it to me." And man, that was like, oh, here we go. It's at this point, it's a straight shot to fame and fortune. Stadiums are probably in a 1 to 2 year window. And it became like this motivational challenge for me. Like, I'm going to make something that, you know, can be played on the radio. And so I started making these songs. And long story short, I made something that, one afternoon they played on the radio, local hour, and I was just like, this is it, off to the races. So I started working on making my first album, and I, started playing shows around town and got a band together, and we were just going after it. And I spent about the next 5 or 6 years doing sort of the artist thing under my own name, releasing my own records. And so that was kind of my next open door of like, people seem to want me to be an artist and release music and tour and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And at the end of that sort of like 5, 6 year period, I kind of got to this point where I realized that what I really enjoyed in the musical process, much more than being sort of like the name and the face and the kind of touring in front of people entity, is that my biggest joy in the musical process was everything that went into making the record, and not necessarily what went into like promoting and taking the record out into the world.
Mhm.
And so I kind of listened to that intuition, and I thought, well, I sort of became an artist without really knowing what it meant to be an artist. And I realized that my favorite part of the musical creation process is the sort of front end studio, microphones, instruments side of things. And so I started asking friends of mine, um, hey, would you want to come over? Because at that point, I'd made some friends who were also musicians and songwriters. And so I started asking people, like, would you want to come over and work on one of your songs? And
Mhm.
at that point, I didn't really I didn't really think of it through the lens of like I'm now going to be a producer or an engineer or whatever, because I really just knew like other songwriters or like bands, and so I didn't really have any sort of clear knowledge of like what a producer was or what that means, or know anyone that did it really. But I started to just sort of exercise that love of musical creation by offering it up to other people that I knew wrote songs and maybe didn't have a really cool USB microphone, or no, at that point I probably had like a really bad like $100 condenser microphone.
As many of us start with.
Yeah, yeah.
My first mic was about the same.
Yeah, and I remember when I got my first, rather than going into GarageBand and selecting the USB microphone as my input source, I remember when I got my first 2-channel PreSonus interface, and I was like, "Oh, this is a whole new game. I have to select not just the microphone itself, but an external device, and then plug in the mic to that external device, maybe get some phantom power going."
It's
It was
funny how
big.
those little baby steps stick in our
Oh my
memory as
gosh.
like massive,
Yeah.
like we think of them as like, oh, this is such a milestone for me, you know?
Yeah.
But
I,
obviously so much led up to that, as you've talked about. So
yeah.
it's interesting what we view as the markers, the mile markers on our journey.
Totally. And they're so important too. Like I think in this world we often, because of the visibility of the internet and social media, it's like people have this, no matter what you're doing, it's like you have this idea constantly bearing down on you that you should be like 10 years ahead of wherever you are. And
Yeah.
you kind of just have to go on the journey that you're going to go on. And it's funny with where I am now. I'll get back to the linear story and finish it out, but it is funny sometimes being where I am now, where it's like music is very much my life and my work,
Hmm.
but like I'm a digital garage band kid. And so there's a lot of times when, I come up against that in my career where people are talking about, classic records or classic pieces of gear, or what it was like in the console days and like all those different things, where I'm like, oh, I actually don't know that, like that's that's not my time. And sometimes I feel like, oh man, I should really know all this stuff, but
How
it's
dare
like
you not know how to splice tape?
yeah. So it is funny that there's kind of this, at least I feel, and I would imagine a lot of people relate to this, that sometimes there's this kind of perpetual nagging feeling of like, oh, I should be here, or I should know about this, or I really should have taken the time to do this. And it's like, you know what?
The
Sometimes you got
the
to spend a
classic
year.
should statement. I did
Yeah.
I did cognitive behavioral therapy for I'm still technically doing it and practicing it, but one of the things is a should statement, right? Then that's such a
Yeah.
dangerous thing because it puts this weight of expectations on us.
Yeah.
And the guy who classified the different cognitive distortions, his name was David Burns.
Hmm.
He said, if you do that, you'll have a really shitty day. And
Yeah.
whenever people say it now, I'm like, I can't not hear it, you know?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
shoulds, and it's such a dangerous thing to set up in your mind. I should, because then it's this, you're having regrets about the past and anxiety about the future of things you quote need to do,
Yeah.
and none of that is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So yeah, I anyone on any music making journey, I would just say like love the stage that you're in, and
Hmm.
like you can't speed. I mean, you can speed it up if you want to, just like if you love it enough to just like immerse yourself in it deeply. Yeah, you can speed it up, but also it's like every stage is important. Like I
Hmm.
literally remember searching on YouTube, what is a compressor? And it's not even like, not that like, oh, how could you never not know what a compressor is? But it's just like I remember just being like that, having that wonder of like, I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm like watching YouTube videos and people are talking about compression. Like, what is that? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't even know, and that was like a fun phase. Like, it's
Hmm.
fun when you learn. It's like almost more fun at the beginning when you're just learning these like huge things all the time than it is to be like, oh, I really need to deeply scour Reddit to find this one solution for this weird glitch that I'm having,
Hmm.
every 38 minutes in Pro Tools. Like, it's more fun to learn the big stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
it really is. How do you keep that sense of like discovery? I mean, I find that some of the people I know who I admire most as musicians and are most passionate about it are the people who keep that sense of discovery. What do you do to
yeah.
keep that alive?
I think a big part of it is having the mindset and remembering the truth that pretty much everyone, if not absolutely everyone, has something to teach you, no matter where they're at in their journey. I can think of so many people that, whether it's something, specific and technical or just something general or philosophical, like when you get to have the privilege of having some other musicians around you, some other creative people around you. They don't even have to be in music, but when you have some people that speak into your life in a way where you have something to learn from them, it kind of keeps life perpetually fresh. And with what I'm up to musically these days, my average week, I usually interface with 2 or 3 people I've never met in some sort of songwriting context or production context, and it's just amazing the simple things that people will do in a room together, or over Zoom or Google Meet or whatever, where they say something and you go, "Oh, wow, I hadn't actually thought about that before," or "I didn't think about it in that way," or you go to someone else's studio and you're peeking over their shoulder and they're doing some key command thing that you're like, "Wait, I've used that program for 10 years. I didn't know you could do that with 2 key command, like 2 keystrokes." And then you just realize you wasted 10 years of your life doing it the long way that you'll never get back. But I think just kind of remembering that no matter where someone is on their journey, they probably know some little piece of the puzzle that you don't have. And when you can walk around with that, it keeps life really exciting and interesting, and makes like other people really exciting and interesting, because they're seeing this world of music through their own set of glasses that you'll never get to look through, but you can maybe borrow a little trick or two from their playbook. I
And
had a friend.
from a cold
Okay.
business perspective on that, like you talked about 2 or 3 new people a week that you're interacting with, that grows the number of people you know and the number of opportunities that end up coming your way.
Hmm.
That's not the reason I think you do it. People who network are,
Yeah.
generally very transparent about it, and generally the
Yeah.
kind of people I don't like to spend time with.
Yeah.
Whereas people like you are, no, I'm just enjoying the creation part, and that's what builds a network, is the doing,
Yeah.
you know,
Totally.
and the
So
listening, like you're talking about, being open to that.
yeah, I had a friend that put it very like succinctly in a way that I've uh, endlessly parroted to other people to spread the gospel of, because I loved the way he put it, where he was like, really, at the end of the day, we all have like 4 cool tricks that we know, that just we know. And you just have to keep working with new people in order for those 4 tricks to still be cool. And each
As
time
somebody who
you
has
work.
4 models of microphone, that hits very close to home for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and like when you work with new people, you see their 4 tricks and you go, "Oh, wow, I've never thought of those before," and then maybe you just lightly steal a little bit of them. But it's like I think, going back to the should thing, it's easy to think that, oh, everyone else is like master of all, like everyone else is just accelerating in every possible aspect of what they do, because it's the advent of social media and everything. Like everything's just very visible right now, like
Hmm.
you're just constantly like, here's all my peers right here.
Showing
uh,
the very best things most of the time.
yeah, yeah. And so it's funny to remember, like, yeah, even the people you admire the most, like they have their cool tricks and you admire them for their cool tricks, but like that doesn't mean that you don't have anything cool, or that they know every single possible thing there is. It's just like we're drawn to people by the thing that they do that creates a sense of wonder and
Hmm.
mystery in us, to say like, wow, I have no idea how they did that. Like that draws you in, and everybody
Hmm.
has a couple of those things, and that's what makes working collaboratively with people, or even if you're not in a collaborative zone in your musical life, just even the internet, like I like YouTube. I wouldn't have a career in music without YouTube, because it's just like the endless ability to be like, "Oh, I wonder how someone does this," and type that weird, obscure thing into YouTube, and there's like 20 specific videos for exactly that thing. Like, it's such an amazing, like, I remember talking to a friend who was like, a couple decades further along in his career than me, and he was like, "I remember like having the 8-pound Pro Tools manual, where when like I had a problem or a weird thing, like I had to go to the glossary and find out what page it was on and like leaf through and read around. And now it's like anytime I hit some sort of roadblock, I'm just like, open up an internet browser, YouTube. Why is this thing happening? And like
Yep.
10 seconds later, I'm like back on track. So this is all kind of a bit of a long winding tangent, but it's an exciting time to be in music because the obviously the downside of the visibility is you can feel like, oh, everyone's further along than me. The
Hmm.
upside of the visibility is that like people are going through the exact same thing you're going through right now. So if you're wanting to learn how to use a compressor, someone has made a video for that. If your Pro Tools crashes every time you import track data, someone else is going through that too.
A lot of people are going through that because Pro Tools. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the
Ever
industry
since the
standard because
yeah,
it's the industry standard.
yeah. So standardized. Um, so gosh, we did a long offshoot of story, but I'll wrap up that just really quick. So became an artist without knowing what it was like to be an artist, became a producer without knowing what it was like to be a producer. And that led to my like current chapter of my musical life, which brings us to present day, which is I was working on some music for a friend in Minnesota, and he was really good friends with a singer, songwriter, producer who lives out here in LA. And through working with this friend, he had heard this producer in LA had heard what we were working on and got in touch with me and said, I think you should move out to Los Angeles and work in my recording studio. And to me, growing up in small town in Minnesota and having dreams of, making music every day for my life, that was like, oh my gosh, this is it. And it had that same feeling to me of when that local radio station was like, we're gonna play your terrible Bandcamp recording. It's that feeling of like, I can see my life in the future. I see it all laid out. And it's funny because it's a completely different life than the one I saw at that time.
Mhm.
I got that email and I thought, I'm going to go on tour and play at sold out shows and release albums. And then just a few years later, I'm just as excited about like, I'm going to be in the studio and I'm going to be comping vocals and I'm going to be doing all this different stuff. So that's such a marker of my life in music, and that like music is the bedrock, but the expression of it continues to evolve and change. And it's just music that's exciting. Um, and
As it
so I
should.
moved.
As it should.
Yeah,
Like music is change, right? You
right.
know, like at its core, there's themes to it. There's a bedrock, but it's constantly moving forward.
Absolutely. So I came out, I worked kind of interning, assisting as an engineer and kind of producer in this recording studio for a couple of years, made it through the bizarre years of COVID, which was
A trip?
strange
Yeah.
a strange time to move away from your hometown and leave behind everyone you know and everything you know.
My wife and I
Um,
did the same thing, so I
yeah,
understand. Yeah.
yeah. But made it through that, and then for the last 3 years, I stayed at that studio job for about 2 years, and then for the last 3 years, I've just been independent freelancer, writer, producer, making music. And I really liked what you said at the beginning. I think you used the term wingspan. I really like that. I'm gonna steal that. That's one
Oh,
of your
by
4
all
tricks.
means. By all means.
It's mine now.
Uh,
So
we talked about a blind squirrel being, finding a nut every once in a while. Every once in a
yeah.
while, this, brain vomit that comes out my mouth says something eloquent and poetic, but most of the time
No, it's
it's,
it's a great way of describing because I know you had outlined, one of the things that you enjoy talking with is sort of the business side of like how do you make a life in music sustainable? How do you make it possible? And I think that term wingspan is very, very relevant to that conversation. Um, and I even think back to like the beginning of my musical journey where I thought I was going to like go to a music conservatory and get like a drum set performance degree. And that's very zoomed in. That's very like, here's what I'm doing.
yeah.
And now in a given week, I'm touching music every day, but in a carousel of capacities
Hmm.
that make my life a bit more possible. And yeah, wingspan. I just think that's a really good term.
Well, let's talk about that because I think you're the first um, person that's worn this many hats that I've talked to be honest with
Mm,
you. I talked to Steve Janowick, who made his bones as a recording engineer at Capitol Records,
yeah,
and to this day he's still very talented and wide ranging engineer in terms of genres, but ultimately engineer, right?
yeah,
Mixing, recording, things of that nature. And then there was a acoustic fingerstyle guitarist who's self-recording, and that is, but that's still a narrow lane.
Yeah.
and also a live sound slash studio recordist as well. So
Yeah.
really fairly narrow focuses compared to
Yeah.
you, where you do songwriting. You have like 10 or 11 albums. I was just looking up.
Yeah.
I
Too
see.
many.
I'm seeing. Actually, I take it back. I'm seeing 16 according to Google.
That's
Um,
too many.
so that's not too many at all, man. I mean, when you were talking about as a side tangent, when you were talking about, just recording a bunch of quote unquote terrible music, I was thinking about, I mean, there's variations on this story, but the bottom line is it's like a photography teacher or an art teacher has students and he divides them up into two groups, right? We're
Mhm.
going to grade you based on quantity. We're going to grade this group based on quality. Your job is to take only the best pictures possible, and your job is to take as many pictures as possible, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that the quantity people had the best quality because they were just practicing, and
Right.
for lack of a better term, they were just fucking up all the time, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, you learn from mistakes, right? Or
Yeah.
mistakes. You learn
Yeah.
from those. And because of that, they got so much better at what they were doing. Whereas when we spend way too many hours tweaking compressor settings on one track
Yeah.
of one song, I don't think that
Yeah.
moves the ball forward nearly as much. So like that,
Yeah.
the way you did it is, I think, the way nobody sits down at a piano or a drum set or picks up a violin and is a master of their craft immediately. We all suck
Right.
when we start. So how much can you suck and how quickly can you suck to get to the next
Yeah.
stage? Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's such a good perspective. Yeah.
from the business side of things, like you are, when we talk about Wingspan, from a more concrete, we live in an age where if you want to make a living in music, you have to make, especially in LA, you have to make a fair amount of money. And
Yeah.
are you married? Do you have kids?
I'm married. I don't have any kids.
Ah, smart man, just like me. Um,
Yep.
yeah. So like there's now somebody else in your life that you have to be concerned about bringing in money for and things like that.
Yeah.
So what does, we're obviously not going to break down your tax return, but what does your
Yeah.
income stream look like? Not
I
maybe
dropped
even
it
if
in the
that's
chat, by the
gratuitous.
way.
Oh, okay, perfect. Great. I'm just going to publish that. I'll put the link. It's got
Yeah.
your social security number and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, if
Yeah.
anybody wants to steal the steal the credit of a middle class musician in Los
Yeah.
Angeles, I feel like you could be doing better things with your time. There's bigger
Yeah. And
bigger
you
fish to fry out there.
you might be disappointed with the result as well.
All right, so according to this, you can afford a 1997 Honda Civic
Yeah.
with this new identity.
Yeah. Oh, it's so real.
Little too real. Sorry, that
Yeah.
got personal. So like as far as your income streams,
Yep.
you've done you have a ton of records. You have I saw you were touring with Ginny Owen Youngs. That's how I
Yeah, that's
met
how we
you.
met. Yeah.
I always want to say Ginny Owens Young. I've talked to her about that. It's a
Yep.
perpetual problem.
Yep.
Um,
It comes for us all.
yeah. And you have the YouTube thing. You have quite a social media presence as well.
Mhm.
Like, what does your income stream look like? How do all these hats that you wear end up creating a sustainable life for you? Because I think that's the question so many people are asking themselves in 2024, the year of our Lord.
Yes, yes. Lord, hear our prayer.
I know, right?
Um, so basically, I guess it's not really basically because it is a bit crazy, but the streams that keep me alive fall into a couple of camps. One is, I would say this, well, the two simple ones that come to mind immediately are um, fees for concrete, tangible services in music like production or playing something on someone's record. So, a
Mhm.
couple of examples for that would be I have a good friend that makes sort of country, Western leaning styles of music. And I got started when I first started playing guitar. I listened to a lot of like folk music, so a lot of like finger picking and hammer-ons and different things like that. And this guy who makes this style of music, he doesn't play guitar in that way. And so a lot of times for his songs, he'll lay down a basic idea of what he's thinking, send it to me, and then I'll redo the guitar parts with sort of a little bit of my own flair and twang.
Mhm.
And so that's a very like tangible service. Would you play the guitar parts for this song? I'm not necessarily involved in other aspects of the song. I'm not going to produce it. I'm not going to mix it. It's very like, please play this instrument and perform this part. So I would say that's not a major source of my hours in a day, but that is something that comes up. I also have, just out of frame, I have a very soft, felty piano that
Hmm.
people like the sound of when you don't want the same VST that every other person is using, when you want something that sounds real, because it is real. So that's a very like concrete thing. It's just sort of like tracking and playing instruments. That's a revenue stream for me. Another revenue stream for me that's a bit more kind of easy to define is the fact that I spent about 6 or 7 years, and still do to some extent, um, releasing my own music. And so that's not a major revenue stream either, but by putting your music out there, you can do your homework and find out the bleak current streaming payouts. But I have
Bleak
a
is an understatement.
yeah, but I have a catalog of music that's out there in the world, and
Mhm.
especially because I spent about 5 years really actively pursuing that, going out and touring and playing shows and trying to build up that audience and the social media side of it as well. That is still an audience, and when people interact with that music, by it being on Spotify and Apple Music and all the different platforms,
Mhm.
that sort of, it's funny because I guess it's technically a passive income stream, but man, it sure feels pretty active to make it and get it out there.
It certainly does, and
Yeah.
having the back catalog is nice.
Yeah.
I know I have contributed, a fair few streams to your catalog. Don't spend that
Oh, I
nickel on
appreciate it.
drugs,
Yeah.
But uh, I'm curious. Do sync licenses and sync fees ever kind of come out of the blue? Are you with a sync house in particular, like Atrium or somebody?
I've worked off and on with a couple different people over the years. Sometimes people will want to do like a partnership or a relationship around like a specific release. Like I had on one of my albums, I had like a sync, someone working sync for like that album specifically,
Hmm.
that yielded a couple small things. I had a song, and I'm guessing this show can't possibly be running anymore, but there was a show I think on ABC called Nashville for a while, and I had a
Hmm.
couple songs in that, little minor placements here and there. I've had a couple of my songs through just sort of like blind good luck, right place at the right time. A couple of my songs end up in some commercials over the years for decent kind of payouts. And for anyone listening that isn't familiar with that world, like a sync is just typically a specific usage of your song in some sort of media, and usually they pay out a fee, a specific fee for the usage of that. So that's happened to me a few times over the years, and then this this past year, no, 2 years ago, I ended up having the luck of having a song in a Netflix show called "The Devil in Ohio," and that came out actually in an interesting way, where I was sent a brief for what they were looking for like the title theme. Like when you
Hmm.
watch a show and something happens and then they go to the theme, and if the theme is the same every week, even though
Hmm.
the content might be different. And so I was pitching an idea for this theme, and months go by after I submit it, and finally I hear back, no, we didn't pick this. So that was fully on spec.
Yeah, I
You're just
was
going to
gonna
try,
say on spec works tough.
and it ends up being a fairly large percentage of what you do in the music world.
Yeah.
Your paid hours to your unpaid hours can be at times a discouraging uh, and very real factor. But I pitched for this theme, and month later hear back, no, we didn't pick it. And then, oh well, that was a day and a half wasted. Classic. But then weirdly, I heard back like an additional month later from the same people, and they said we didn't pick your song for the theme, but we actually ended up revisiting it for a different moment in the show, just as a one-off usage. And so that ended up being one of those instances where you think it's time wasted, and then something comes out of the archive,
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff happens in my world not necessarily specifically on the sync side, but maybe would be a word of encouragement for people musically is that sometimes you think things that are just going to collect dust on a shelf or space on a hard drive, weird things can come around, or you know, songs that have sat for a while can then suddenly pick up a little interest or have a little moment on social media. And so
Hmm.
I do think an encouraging aspect of what's going on in the world right now, where like songs don't just get one shot, you know, like that 24 hours when you put something out.
That
Like
is really encouraging. Yeah.
I used to basically, you know, my entire sense of self-worth hung in the balance of like the 24-hour performance of something that I would put out into the world, whether that's a social media post or a song that goes to streaming. Like it's so easy. Our world is so metriced out that
Hmm.
it's very, very easy to think like, okay, 3 hours after I shared this thing that's really important to me, I've now decided it's completely worthless because it's not performing well on fill in the blank platform.
The results based metrics are such a
Yeah.
problem in so many places as opposed to
Leads
the process base, right?
Yeah, leads to really, really rocky mental health if
You don't have to tell me twice, man. I've been in therapy for 4 years for that shit, so
Yeah.
getting better every day. But it's
Yep.
a hole you dig yourself in without realizing it.
Yeah, totally. So the revenue streams, I have my own library of music. Um, I have doing very tangible things for people, like playing an instrument on their song.
Hmm.
And then one of the things that I've done for a number of years that is one of my many side hustles that has been a nice revenue stream for me is that I edit podcasts, which
Okay.
is something, it's, you know, not something I would shout from the rooftops, but it's been a very like great kind of meet the immediate needs sort of side gig for me,
Hmm.
where I have actually the friend that through whom we met, Jenny,
Hmm.
is the one of the leaders of a fearless podcast empire.
Yes,
and
no joke. Yeah.
years ago, when I first moved to LA and gasped at the prices of everything, um, thankfully at that same time, Jenny had said, "Oh, we have this editor that's, you know, transitioning out, and we have all this raw podcast tape that we do, and we need someone to listen down and make edits and take out all the moments when we say something we didn't mean to and back it up and drag in all our little sound clips and stuff." And so that, you know, in this era of we present our best self and only our best self at all times, that's a very like real income stream for me that I'm very grateful for. Sometimes that I'm going and doing after I eat dinner and late into the evening to just
Hmm.
like continue to round out what can be a really fickle industry. Um, and you know, that's again not like my main saving grace, but again, as we're as we add things to these different silos, that term wingspan starts to come back, where
Yeah.
when you know something about audio and, you know, the various programs that people use to edit and polish and manipulate it, that is a service and it can be applied in a number of different ways. Obviously the most fun way is to make cool inspiring music, but there's also very real tangible things that you can do that are a service and a value to many
Hmm.
aspects of the commercial world, because audio is a huge part of our life and not everyone
Yeah.
knows how to manipulate it, record it, edit it, clean it up, fill in the blank. Um, and then I think I just have two more silos.
Only
um,
two.
just two more silos. Another aspect which you mentioned is kind of the social media space, kind of the confluence of Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and something that I've stumbled into in the last couple years mainly, um, is kind of partnering with um, music companies to raise some visibility around the products that they make. And a lot of times, fully transparent, that's mostly just an exchange of like, would you be willing to try this thing out and make a video about it? Not a lot of times does that mean money changing hands.
Hmm.
Um, but as a person that like is very passionate about musical process and what goes into making music, it's a great way for me to um like have more tools for making music, and then also raise visibility for people that I really believe in. Like sometimes it's, smaller manufacturers that are trying to get their thing off the ground. And for me, it's
I
like
wonder what that
if
would be like.
yeah, for me, it's like I'm picky about what I choose to showcase because I really want it to be things that I actually use. I don't want to say, "Oh, here's this random thing that someone wanted me to try out and I don't use it at all, but you should." But when I have something, especially if I have, friendships and relationships with the people that are pouring their creative passion into making these things and they've become a part of my musical life, I definitely want to tell people about it. And
Mhm.
so that sometimes is just a, video in exchange for a trinket someone's making, or kind of implementing it into my just regular um stream of content about music making. And then sometimes if it's like a bigger company or they have a marketing wing or something, they might say, "Hey, we came across your content online and we have you in mind for this specific campaign that we're going to roll out, and here's what our budget is for that." And so that stuff rolls along every now and then, where it is, an actual paid gig to make some content and make something visible for people to kind of see their product implemented. um and then the final silo, which is the newest one for me, is the production and songwriting world. And production, I only put in the new. I've been doing music production for a long time, but the kind of LA specific production songwriting sort of dance is a little bit newer for me in that I do a lot of like speculative, rather than people seeking me out and saying, "Hey, I know you did this song with this artist. I want to hire you to do a production of my song."
Mhm.
It's more spec work with people you don't know, where you come in with nothing, write a song together, and then spend the last part of the day making a quick demo. And then down the line, that song might be released. And if they use your production, you can finish the song out and collect a production fee. Or sometimes the song would get released by the artist, but they go with someone else for production, but then you still are credited and paid as a songwriter through that kind of churn, which is sort of
Songwriter
like
royalties, have they updated those for streaming yet? I
they
know
the
Congress is
current
behind on a lot of things, but
the current calculation, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but the current calculation is that a stream is some fraction of like what a radio play is, according to
Mhm.
this outdated. It's in it's accounted for, but not in the way that it is reflective of how much streaming is a part of our life.
I remember when Pharrell came out with Happy, and it was like the biggest song globally for
Yeah.
like it was like 10 weeks straight or something absurd.
Yeah.
And on Pandora, he got something like 2 billion streams when Pandora was like,
Yeah.
really the happening place.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember his songwriting royalties on it were like 4 figures. It was
Yeah.
absurd. And he
Yeah.
pointed out the problem of like I made the biggest song in the world
Yeah.
for like 2.5 months. It was the biggest song in the world.
Yeah.
And I made less in those 10 weeks on my
Yeah.
songwriting royalties than I could have made as like, I don't want to pick on any particular profession, but
Yeah.
like as a plumber's assistant or like bagging groceries or
Yeah.
whatever, like that's a huge problem.
Yeah,
So
it's hard to catch up with the way that the world evolves when there's constantly a new place where music is being exploited.
exploited is the perfect word for it because I was waiting to see what you were going to say, and I was curious, like, what's a better word for what he's going to say? But I think you nailed it the first time because, like,
Yeah.
exploitation is it now, and like, I mean, now you look at. I am not a songwriter or a musician, really,
Mhm.
and AI scares the crap out of me for the music industry.
Yeah, I
Like,
do really
I'm not typically pessimistic about the music industry.
yeah.
I'm more realistic about it, but looking at it realistically, if some company that is doing commercials, is like I could pay somebody $3,000 or $4,000 for their song for this campaign, or
Mhm.
I could pay an AI company $200 or $300
Yeah.
to write a song in the style of this artist, basically
Mhm.
a machine generated sound alike.
Yeah.
Um, and I could save 90% on my budget and
Yeah.
put that in my pocket. Sync licenses are one of the few places where you can still see, 4 or 5 figure
Yeah.
checks come in for the
Yep.
upfront payment, as along with a passive stream on the back for shows and stuff like that. So, like,
Yeah.
it's so funny because oh, when streaming and Napster and then streaming, oh, music is just your business card for the touring,
Yeah.
but now touring is dead, for lack of a better term, and
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's just your business card for your recorded music. Well, what when am I stop? When do I stop giving
Yeah.
out business cards and start
Where
making
does
a
it
living?
stop? Yeah.
But
It's so true.
I mean, I like your silos idea because it's like investing, right? For finance people, but like you don't put all your money in one particular stock or particular fund.
Yep.
You're spreading it out across a multitude of things so that one thing doesn't make or break you. Like if AI turns your songwriting royalties into mush, you've still got the podcast editing that can help
Yep.
pick up the slack. And um, I do have a question for you on that. Like, there's
Yep.
24 hours in a day, and this is
Yeah.
something I perpetually run into, and I'm supposed to use a third of those for sleep. Doesn't
Yeah.
always happen, but I'm supposed
Yeah.
to. And so I'm curious. You have all these things that you're balancing, and you talked about
Mhm.
like walking through the open door. So how do you manage your time that way? Like, what does your day look like? I mean, I don't want to say a typical day because I don't think there's such a thing in the music industry, but like,
Yeah.
how do you make sure that you're not overextending yourself? You know?
Oh, man, if I ever find out, I'll send you an email.
Yeah, write a book.
Uh,
You'd sell a
yeah.
bajillion copies to musicians,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Yeah. Those are things that can feel, and not to, like, promote or praise, an out of balance lifestyle, but at times, um, pursuing a career in music and balance and health can seem like, tricky things to, coexist.
Mhm,
But, um, I would say, what would I wanna say about this? I view myself on a bit of a journey with that because I think I'm coming out of maybe a good solid. I just turned 30, and I started, making my own recordings when I was 15 or 16, so not professionally, but I've been at music a while, and I think I'm coming out of a good solid decade, basically 20 to 30, where I just didn't really do anything other than just work all the all the time. Um, and I think that can have a couple of it can have a couple of, reasons that it manifests. One is obviously the idea when you're a freelancer that, well, if I work more, I'll make more money, and if I work more, I'll survive, and that's a very difficult thing to quantify when in the freelance life the amount of hours you work and what you get paid aren't necessarily, some sort of concrete equation. So it can be very elusive to think, oh, just a couple more hours, oh, just one more late night. And then you get to the end of the month or the year and you go, well, that didn't actually move the needle in any way that I can
mhm,
point to. So that can be a slippery slope. And then I think I'm also prone, as we all are probably, again, circling back to that idea of visibility and social media and all that stuff, that someone is always ahead of you. Someone's always, it can be very easy to make work and accomplishment your permission to value yourself. Um, I encountered this a lot, and it's something that I'm trying to actively combat is like, okay, I am getting to the end of a day and I was really productive and I got all the stuff done on my list. So now I can clock out and feel good about myself. And I give
mm,
myself permission to now go watch 8 minutes of TV before I go to bed. um, Whereas, oh, I didn't get to my to do list and things went wrong and it was a day full of obstacles. So now I'm not going to give myself any permission for that to be okay. And I'm going to feel bad and I'm going to feel anxious and restless because I didn't earn my salt today. Um, and that's very understandable to fall into that trap, but it's again a very slippery slope of like
mhm.
my sense of value and my sense of happiness and my sense of worth is directly connected to productivity and output. gets a little hairy.
A little
um,
is, especially when you then tie that to results instead of process, right? That's an even
yeah.
because a lot of times the results, like you just talked about, for spec work and things like that. Uh-oh. Did I lose you? Are
Oh,
you there?
you got a little grainy for a second, and now you're back.
Okay, great. Yeah, so did you. But that
Okay,
you're still a little grainy. We'll see if it's my Wi-Fi or not.
cool.
It My Wi-Fi every once in a while just kind of gives up the ghost, and I have to go reset
Yeah,
the router. Such is life in the 21st century. But
indeed.
you just talked about spec work and all these things where the results are outside of your control. And so then when
Yeah,
you tie your self-worth not only to your productivity, but on the results of those productivity, which may not actually bear fruit, you're planting seeds that might not go anywhere. Um,
yeah,
yeah, hairy is the right word for it, because it's like, I am very guilty of the same thing, and it's something I've
hmm
been working to, decorrelate those two things. Where, like, if
yeah,
I have a bad, a day where I am intentionally avoiding important things that I need to do or whatever because they scare me
hmm
because they look like big mountains or yada yada, um,
hmm
I make sure to go out and reward myself, not because then I'm going to build a habit of being lazy or being avoidant, but
right.
I'm separating those two things, productivity and
Yeah,
being kind to myself, because
yeah,
that's been something I've been really aware of, is how much I built my self-worth into the worst version of it, which is the results, you know.
yeah,
And I've been doing this microphone company not as long as you've been doing the songwriting thing, but for 11 years now.
yeah.
And so that's like, and it still hasn't quite gotten to a place where I feel like it's going to sustain me financially.
Right.
So um it's a it's a dangerous thing. I'm curious, how do you attempt to decouple that sense of self-worth with your productivity, with the results, with things like that? How do you say, I can enjoy the success when I have the success, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to let it define how I feel about myself?
I think there's two things that come to mind with that. One is trying to cultivate an imagination of what am I outside of making music? Do I
Mhm,
have any identity apart from that? And that's something I've been thinking a lot over the past couple years. And I think especially not that there's any sort of specific meaning that comes with it, but just like entering a new decade and turning 30,
mhm,
I've thought more about like who am I when I shut down the computer and turn off the power conditioner and walk out of this room? Like,
mhm.
because if this is the whole of who I am and it's going poorly or it's hard, like, it's going to be hard to keep any sort of perspective about the bigger picture of what it means to be alive and means to be a human. Um, And so I've started to think more about like what are the things that I enjoy that make me feel like myself and more of like a whole person outside of music. And so I've started to think about like intentionally trying to carve out a little bit more space for things like reading and being outside and
Mhm.
cooking and like all the things that are just human and small and not results driven.
Yeah.
Although I can get very intense about the number of books that I want to read. It's like
Oh,
you can
I'm familiar
metric
with that problem too.
you can metric anything. So it's like, oh, I really love to read. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like, I'm going to read 75 books this year.
Well, and it's a society, like, we live in a culture that prides itself on quantity and metrics, and specifically says, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly says, tie your self-worth to these things that you do, and tie your
hmm
identity to your occupation. And
Yeah.
that's a scary thing, man. And that's something I did on accident over the better part of a decade, and I've had to unwind that.
Yeah.
And that's I think it's so easy to take a passion and turn it into an identity. And then
Yeah.
when that passion, for whatever reason, doesn't, you know, succeed in a monetary way or in a metrics based way, or even just, it doesn't meet what you had initially planned for it in some way in your head. Um,
Yeah.
then it feels like your identity is being attacked, not your passion. And that's such a,
Yeah.
I'm still in the process of untangling that knot. But it is heartening to hear that I'm not alone, and hopefully for
Yeah.
the three people listening to this, um,
Yeah.
that they're not alone in that feeling of making sure that they're a person outside of music and
Yeah.
outside of engineering or production or violin
Yeah.
or podcast editing or any of the
Yeah.
other things within your wingspan.
Yeah.
So we are going into overtime here, which I don't particularly mind as long as you
Yeah.
don't. I did
Yeah.
want to ask you a couple more questions about
Hit me.
you're a multi-instrumentalist. And
Yeah.
one thing I appreciate about your social media is I've learned about new tools, and you
Mm.
introduce them in very interesting ways,
Mm.
specifically by using them in your craft, right? Like I remember
Mm.
you were using a number of, I don't remember which company was making them, but a number of like micro MIDI controllers, and
Yeah.
you did those like, write lyrics to these sections of song videos. I
Yeah.
thought those were genius, and they were, I mean, the the music that you laid down with them was fantastic, which obviously
Yeah.
helps.
Thanks.
But another one you introduced me to was like a guitar cello thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one blew my mind. That one,
Yeah.
I reshared that with my followers because I'm like, that is trippy, man. I've never seen
Yeah.
anything like this.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like we talked about earlier the feeling of discovery, right? Part of the
Mm.
feeling of discovery, and I think why companies like mine can exist is because people love the tools and the
Yeah.
creative outlets that it gives them. So I'm curious, when you're looking at new tools, how do you view them? How do you view gear purchases or trying out gear? What are
Mm.
some cool things you found? You can mention Vanguard mics here if you want, but you are not required to. Um, yeah,
Definitely will.
tell me, because gear is certainly an obsession, and unfortunately can become predominant in people's minds over the actual craft,
Yeah.
if they're not careful. But I'm curious how you view gear, how you find some of this stuff, and
Yeah.
what you appreciate about it.
That's such a great question. I'm realizing I think throughout this whole chat, every time you ask me a question, I start by saying, "Well, I basically have two things to say about." Like everything somehow has two things. I don't know why, but maybe that's just how my brain works. But two things that come to mind. um, I think two things that I'm looking for when it comes to gear. The first category would be like accuracy or precision,
Hmm.
and the other category is like mystery and magic.
Hmm.
And they're very unrelated. And so things that I would put in the like accuracy and precision category would be like microphones, studio monitors, preamps, like the kind of things where you're like, when I play my upright piano and I sit at the bench, it feels a certain way. It sounds a certain way in the room. I can feel the vibrations in it, like in my chest. And then you can throw up a microphone in front of it and hear it out of your monitors and be like, oh, it doesn't give me the same
Hmm.
feeling at all. And so one side of gear that I kind of seek out for is like just accurate capture, which seems really simple. Um, but it's very, very interesting how just the translation of an instrument in a room or a feeling you get from playing your favorite guitar, suddenly you record it into a microphone and play it back and you don't get that same feeling.
Hmm.
And so things that come to mind, I mean, an easy connection off the bat is when I first tried the Vanguard V4 and I played this my favorite acoustic guitars. I have this old crusty 1974 Guild. I can't remember actually the model number. It's a J something. I think they just ripped off the Gibson model numbers. Um,
Shocking in the music
yeah,
industry and music
yeah,
gear, you don't say.
yeah. They're like, "Do you want the same guitar but cheaper and doesn't sound the same? Try Guild."
Also, it's not crusty and old; it's
Yeah.
vintage. At least when
Yes,
you list it on
exactly.
Reverb, that's how you do it, right?
But that guitar gives me a certain feeling, and it feels a certain way to play it, and has a certain sound, and I'd been capturing it with a number of different microphones, and when I first tried out your V4, I remember hearing it back and thinking, like, "That's how the guitar feels to me." Like,
Mm.
that's what it feels like when I sit and play it, and so that's a thrilling experience when it comes to gear, because I know sometimes gear can be this infinite search of, like, well, if I only have this gear, then I'll do this thing. And
The N plus one problem. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes to me it's just like, oh, this thing rings true. Like I've been using, like the same monitors for a while, but I remember when I first got them and just like listening to things and being like, that sounds, and I'm in a small room, and so it's not like I'm using these gigantic, you know, studio grade professional commercial studio monitors or anything, but I remember getting them, putting them in this room and just thinking like, it sounds right to me. Or like when I work on them and then I go play something in the car, or I play it on a Bluetooth speaker, or I listen to it in my headphones, like it just feels right. Like it feels like it's working.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of the first category, like accuracy and just like translation of like that's what I feel when I play that instrument, or that's what that piano sounds like to me.
I think
Um,
on a side note, I just think it's funny that you talk about accuracy and precision. And I think it's funny in a positive way because I think the same way about it. But you talked about
mhm.
accuracy and precision, and then proceeded to use a bunch of qualitative and artistic words to describe accuracy
Yeah,
and precision.
yeah,
And it's the perpetual problem of people like me who make gear, which is you
yeah,
have to marry the scientific and the objective frequency response and
right,
equivalent noise level and all this stuff. Um,
right,
and then you also have to marry that with why does it make me feel the way I feel? And
totally. Well,
the
and that's
objective part of it. And even though they seem completely unrelated, they are intertwined in a much deeper way than we realize.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because I even used, yeah, I said accuracy, and then I talked about it mostly from a subjective personal lens, where it's like I don't know if you graphed out several different microphone responses on my Guild acoustic, like which one would be technically, I don't,
Yeah.
objectively this is, but your microphone just made me like feel right. I just was like, for me and my brain and the way it works and the way it feels to me personally, it's just that's what I want it to sound like. It
Which I
rings
think is
true.
the core of musical experience, right? Like we remember songs that hit us with feelings or resonate with something we're going through and the emotions of it, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that's such a big part of gear that some people I think miss the mark on when they're talking about gear or sometimes when they're designing gear.
Mhm.
We're worried about ruler flat frequency responses when
Mhm.
our hearing isn't ruler flat,
Right.
you know. And it's much more about what you're putting into it too, which is where people like you come in when you have
Yeah.
talented people singing into a good microphone. If I sing into that microphone, it's not going to sound good. I can tell you that. There's a reason I make mics. So you were talking about the accuracy and precision, and
Yeah.
the other
The
side of it. Number
the
number two of your two-part theory of everything.
everything has two parts.
Yeah.
The other part that is intriguing to me about gear is like magic and mystery, where it's like the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, where like
Mhm.
one thing is like that feels true and right, and then the other thing is like that's doing something that I have no idea how to explain, and I absolutely love it. And so like things that come to mind for me with that are like I work pretty closely with some friends of mine that make guitar pedals. They, I guess they're technically guitar pedals, but they're just kind of like little magic devices. The company's called Chase Bliss.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and they think about signal and audio, and they have their own just kind of view on the way things work, and they're just little mystery boxes where it's like sometimes I'll put like a single guitar note through it, and then this weird sonic explosion comes out the other side. And so it's like I kind of live on those two spectrums of gear, where it's like I either want it to be like true and resonant and like simple and like and accurate, or I want it to just be like strange and explosive and like make me laugh. And so those are like the two things that I'm always looking for when it comes to gear. And yeah, I feel like that side of things would be more like instruments and pedals and synthesizers and just like things that do a thing that make you surprised and make you remember that music is like fun and funny and weird.
Yeah, and spontaneous and not necessarily. It can be formulaic, but it doesn't have to be. And I
Mhm.
think in an era where music I think a lot of people would agree that successful, monetarily successful music has become increasingly formulaic. I
Yeah.
mean, you look at the two types of music predominantly coming out of Nashville, which is like crossover country and contemporary Christian. And I would
Mhm.
argue that those are two probably the most cookie cutter genres in terms of this is the box you want to sit in if you want to make money, right? But then
For sure.
outside of that, coming out of Nashville, there's Americana and there's
Yeah.
indie, there's like new folk and there's bluegrass and there's all these other beautiful things coming out of it that
Yeah.
are spontaneous and creative and interesting, right? And we
Yeah.
try and ascribe labels to everything because that's what we do as humans, but that's not how most things work,
Yeah.
including music genres.
Yeah.
So,
Very
um,
true.
a couple of quick ones to close it up, like a lightning round thing. You can't pick two.
Yes,
You
I'm
can
ready.
only pick one in this.
Yeah, I
So
can't have two responses
you
to
can't have two
everything. That's
responses
been
to
my
these.
problem.
Um, if you had to pick one of let's just go one of your songs and say,
Mm,
okay, I'm going to introduce somebody to my music. I feel like this is the song that says this is John Mark Nelson, kind of incorporates all your various stages of songwriting, um,
yeah.
like your early stuff when you waxed ultra poetic, like Boy, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still waiting for that full acoustic version, by the
I
way. I
know.
will
I'm
hound you
ready.
for it.
Yeah. I have to fit it into my time management schedule
I
that
know,
you asked
which
me
we
about.
just talked about, right?
Yeah.
Now that I'm telling you, you were just talking about how you have to be careful about overloading. I'm going to put this huge project on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Thank you for that gift.
you're welcome.
Um, I would honestly say that song, which is a song that I put out in 2014, I think.
Yeah, Sings the Moon was 2014. I'm looking at it at Google right now. Yeah.
Th- that's a quick decade ago.
I know,
Um,
right? That happens fast.
so I was just a young lad of 20 at that time, but that song feels very resonant just to my whole life story. When I come back to the open door thing, the kind of pivotal line in the chorus of that song is just like, don't be afraid of growing and
Hmm.
changing. And gosh, that song just every few, as music creators, it's not often that you can like listen and enjoy your own thing you've created because you've just steeped in it way too long. But every once in a while, for any number of reasons, like I'll hear a snippet of that song and just like think about the way that lyric has deepened over time.
Hmm.
And I hear that line and think, oh, now that applies to this major thing that I'm thinking about in life. Whereas 5 years ago, it meant this to me, and 10 years ago, it meant this to me. That's been a cool song to just come back to and think, man, I wrote this when I was probably 18 or 19. And it's weirdly been like almost a gift to me over the years. Like it was like almost like I was writing a little just like a little post-it note for myself to keep on the side of my laptop and just be like, take a deep breath. Life changes a lot. Curveballs come, dreams emerge, they die. Like it's all part of the process. Like you're just human and it's all happening exactly the way it's going to for the majority of humans that have come before you and will come after you. Take a breath and
It's you captured something so universal about the human experience and yet so deeply individually personal to
yeah.
each person that hears that song, including myself. And on top of that, that chorus melody is so freaking catchy. Like I heard that song for the first time ever at Jenny's show last year
Yeah.
in Philly. And I am not exaggerating when I say for about a week I was humming that tune like
Yeah.
every 5 minutes. And my wife was like, you seriously have to
You
stop because
have
I
to
love
stop.
that song and you're going to ruin it
Yeah.
for me. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And it's
Yeah.
still like, as I was getting ready for today, it popped into my head again. Like
Yeah.
anybody listening to this, it is truly like one of those magical songs that just immediately cemented itself in like my all-time
Mm,
playlist, right? Like
yeah.
I would encourage anybody to listen to it and really listen to the depth and breadth of the lyrics, which is the other thing that impressed me about it. Is it's not
Mm,
super repetitive, really short bits of simplicity. It's like very poetic and eloquent and still very catchy and still
mhm.
very memorable. You captured all these things in one song. And that's it. That's all you got to offer. You're done. Um,
Yeah. That's very kind.
no,
Very kind. I'm
no, it
glad you
really
like it.
it reminded me of "Stop This Train" by John Mayer. That is the
Wow.
category I put it in, like
Wow.
in terms of the lyrical um, profundity.
Mm,
It was really it really is a magical tune. I encourage
Thank you.
anybody that hears this to go take a listen to Boy by John Mark Nelson.
Thank you.
Um, so next lightning round question would be a piece of gear you've discovered that's not my mic that has really um, expanded your horizons as an artist, or like given you a new outlet.
Mm. I'm scanning around my room. um, I think I already sort of made a shameless plug for them, but I'll make one more plug for Chase Bliss because I really love them a lot. Um, this pedal was the first one I was exposed to by them. Oh, my camera is
It's
much
just
higher than I
called
thought it was.
Mood. Awesome.
And they now make a new version of it that's stereo, but I keep this one because they don't actually they've discontinued this one because it's a mono and they've added some other new features and stuff. But this, you know how you can look back over your musical journey and you can sort of point to these moments where like, oh, when I heard this song or when someone showed me this thing or when I fill in the blank, I sort of like my path sort of veered a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to say that about like a guitar pedal, but I just remember someone showing me it for the first time and just realizing like, oh, my imagination for sounds just like grew. You know, in the Grinch
Mm-hmm.
when his heart grows.
Yeah. Three sizes that day, in fact.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's very much like I feel like musical journeys, like you meet an inspiring musician or see a live show or hear an album or whatever it is, like you get those experiences where then you just like level up a bit and
Mm-hmm.
your imagination grows a little bit. It's basically a two-channel pedal. One side of it does kind of like spatial effects like reverb and delay, and then the other side of it does sort of like sort of time-based effects like double time and slow down and like
Mm.
reverse or fast forward, but then they feed into each other so you can like make a little sample, slow it down to half speed and reverse and then like send it through the reverb side. So suddenly your, one guitar lick goes and then it goes and then you pass it through the reverb and it goes like, and just the simplicity of like I can take two notes or a single note and in three little twists it's like this explosive oceanic pad. That was such a profound moment of like, wow, what a amazing shortcut to like magic that just like click twist and suddenly I've created the biggest, most Mariana Trench pad I've ever heard in my life.
What a delightful like chaos machine, That's
Yeah, and it's
amazing.
unpredictable.
I remember
It's
the first time I
unpredictable.
used a chaos pad. I can't remember,
Oh
was that
yeah.
a Kai or was that, I don't remember who made them now. But with the
Was
little touchpad, the XY where it had an
was it
XY,
Korg?
it was Korg. You're totally
Yeah.
right. And
Those things are crazy.
I remember I got introduced to him by Mute Math. I'm not sure if you listen to Mute Math at all.
Huge Mute Math fan.
Man, I have the CD of their original EP that you can't find on Spotify anywhere, and I keep
Yes.
that thing. I have like copies of it on the cloud because I'm like,
Yeah.
this was formative for me,
Oh yeah.
and
I mean, one of
yeah,
the best live bands I've ever seen. I
so good. But they
I saw
loved the
them probably like
Chaos
10
Pad,
times. Oh yeah.
and it was
So good.
that XY function, and you could assign different things. So it was so cool. It was such a brilliant, different tactile way to experience the way
Yeah.
you affect noise. And of course, they, Mute Math was so incredibly creative with it.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
um, what is a record you've heard in the year 2024 that has stuck with you, or a song, from a different
Mm.
artist? You can say your own if you want, but people might think you're
Oh,
you're full of yourself.
yeah. People will unsubscribe. And I need those metrics. I can't afford to
I
lose
can't afford
anybody.
that hit to my self-esteem.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise I won't be able to clock out at night and enjoy my dinner. Um, let's see. 2024. I feel like I've heard some cool stuff. I'll go with a long time. This is just what comes to mind immediately, but an artist that put out a record that was very, very formative to me over a decade ago. And they took about a decade where I didn't see anything that they were up to. They didn't release any music, and they just emerged again with a new record, and I think that's interesting for a couple of reasons. Also, well, the name of the artist is Amanda Bergman, this really, really talented, incredible voice, Swedish, I believe Swedish, singer-songwriter. Put out this record, in I wanna say maybe, like, 2014, 2015, that I just listened to on repeat, and the new record, the single for it was called Wild Geese, Wild Love, which is a crazy song title. And the song is really, really good. I'll send it to you.
Please do.
Um,
I'm putting it
but I
in my
also
notes right
think
now.
it was just a cool reminder. And I was reading a little bit about her and the song and the just her journey in general. And I just think it's a cool reminder that like someone can make a thing and then a decade can elapse and they can do whatever their life demands. Maybe they were going through personal things, maybe they were burnt out on music, who knows? I don't know the details of the story, but the idea that someone can take a decade and then come back and say like here's what I've made
Hmm.
is just very counter to what I understand about, music right now, where it's like, what's the next thing? What do you have in the queue? Do you have your next 9 singles in production? And,
Yep.
is everything sorted out and everything scheduled? And so it's not only just a refreshing, beautiful song, it just almost feels like you can hear the time in it, where it's like, wow, I heard from this person a decade ago and they're back and they were so important to me a decade ago, and here I am a decade older and they're back and now they're having that same impact on me. And I think that's just is a good reminder to not view everything through the lens of like desperation and just get it out and just
Hmm.
finish it and just hurry up and do whatever it takes. And
Yeah.
it's there's a patience in it that I don't often hear in music, and is a reminder to try to implement time and patience into my own practice.
In a world of for lack of a, to use the cliche, instant gratification,
Yeah.
to see the journey take place over a decade
Yeah.
is it's encouraging too, I think, for
Yeah.
people in music who are, I think most people in music, you can say, are struggling. Most
Yeah.
people in this industry are trying to get to whatever the next level is for them.
Mhm.
Maybe that is making their first dollar in
Yeah.
music, or maybe that's a sustainable living in music, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but it feels so far away for a lot of people. You know,
Yeah.
I look at my own journey in microphones and trying to get it to a sustainable living, and boy, there are days where it feels beyond the horizon. You know,
Yeah.
um, and then there's days where it just feels right there. But to
Yeah.
remind myself that, oh, it's taken a decade to get to this point
Mhm.
is a good reminder. And I think that's
Yeah.
a good encouragement in this day and age, I think, is something precious. We got to store those up like nuts for squirrels in the winter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So true.
well, thanks a million, man. You gave me an hour and a half of your time, which we blew right through that, which
Yeah.
I immensely enjoyed this conversation. Just like the last
Me
couple
too.
times we've talked, it's like, oh, we're on the same wavelength on a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So we
Yeah.
even have similar beards, although, like I
It's
said,
true.
mine is slightly grayer than yours.
I'm just waiting for mine. I'm gonna be delighted when mine shows up.
It's my first gray in my head was 17.
Yeah.
So I had a head start on you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I'll catch up. It's coming for all of us.
yeah, I know, right? Well, thanks a million. I really appreciate it. Once again, John Mark Nelson. Go check out his music. Ideally on Bandcamp, where artists make way more money. I will always
Yeah.
parrot this. But if you
Yep.
want to check him out on Spotify, he will also accept that sliver of a penny as well.
Yep.
Um, and yeah, let me know if you ever need anything, man. And I appreciate the time again.
Thanks so much, Derek. This was a delight.
Delight is indeed the word.